was so proud of me.
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is year zero. Today, I have Jeremiah Harding on the show. Jeremiah Harding has a reputation of being too black-pilled for some people, but I actually enjoyed the conversation I had with him. We talked a lot about the supply chain, about agorism, counter economics, and just what we see going on around us and how people can hedge their bets, which, if you haven't figured out, is kind of my thing. So, I will leave you to the show just as soon as you hear about RyanBunting.com. For all of your graphic design needs, RyanBunting.com. Ryan Bunting is a great libertarian and anarcho-capitalist. He's also a great graphic designer. Ryan Bunting designed my podcast logo and Pete Quinones' podcast logo for Free Man Beyond the Wall. RyanBunting.com for all of your graphic design needs. Thank you, Tom Burton, for the music. All right, I'm here with Jeremiah Harding. What's going on, bud?
Well, the slow death of humanity and the collapse of everything that the world relies on.
Yeah. You know, the first time I heard you was on Pete Quinones' podcast. And you seemed so chipper at the time. Y'all were talking about unifying all anarchists together. And then here we are 3 years later, and you're like, oh, Jesus, this is all fucked up.
Well,
like,
I mean, I still support that.
You're the biggest black pill of the liberty movement, and I love it.
Well, see, the thing is, I still support that. But, like, a lot of the people that allegedly want libertarian progress, they don't want it bad enough to put aside their bullshit. And they would rather, be a clique than be a successful movement. I have severe problems with a significant amount of people. And I don't help it by being an asshole all the time, but at least I try to pick good targets. A lot of these people just they pick a side and it's left or right, and they're still stuck in that ossified political bullshit. And I think we're all speaking the same things, but in different languages, which causes a significant amount of problems. For instance, I recently did a vlog. I'm doing vlogs now, on a daily basis. That is when my internet gets not shit, because it's been pretty bad the past few days. So we're going to get that looked at. But when I do my vlogs, I did this vlog on the cathedral because I think it's a bad concept. And I think spreading it around is bad because essentially it's a neo-reactionary concept and it leads to a very specific set of ideas rather than leading to ideas which could unify us all. I think there was already an existing term that adequately described things, and that's the state. It was already used by people like Rothbard. It was already used by people on the left. It was already used by a significant amount of anti-establishment thinkers. And if people could just admit that the state including their own authoritarian, their own pet authoritarians that they like, and then, pledge to go against the whole state and nothing but the state, we'd have a successful unity movement ad hoc. But a lot of people don't want to. They just want to fight the left or progressives, or they want to fight the right and regressives. And both of those parties have ossified themselves into positions where they're not actually interested in progress. They just don't like the other people. Yeah. They hate the left more than the state, or the right more than the state. And by doing so, hey, the state's still here. Congratulations.
Yeah. So you're accomplishing nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I still want the unity thing, and I'm still going to be vaguely chipper because I don't want to be all doom and gloom. It's one of the reasons that I post about Sonic so much is because I don't know, it's a bit of color in the middle of my drab timeline. But
Hmm.
like, the general vibe I want to give off is that yeah, we're all fucked, but we might not be. We can try. We can try to push toward a better future. And a lot of people don't like that because I'm stating what makes the present bad. And some of these people are involved in the things that I talk about. So it's not easy, you know. Um, I it's an uphill battle. It's a Sisyphean task, but like it's one that I'm still pushing toward. I'm just ever more negative because I was already a pessimistic cynic. Like that's the primary reason I wanted unity, right? Because like I think this is all going to end in a bloody apocalypse with rivers of blood and years of darkness, the likes of which will make Revelations look like a children's story. I think this is going to be brutal and terrible, and tyranny will reign. Um, and I don't think we have the numbers to stop it on the left libertarian side or the right libertarian side, nor will we grow either camp by being ossified and siloed.
Yeah. Well, okay. So you've led me down the road where I have a couple of points to make to you. So you just give me 1 second.
Yeah,
But
no problem.
I made I was talking to I told you I was talking to Sal yesterday, and one of the points I made to him was, you know, sometimes I sit back and I see this socialist versus conservative or progressive versus Republican or what, however you want to label all this shit argument. And I'm like, why don't we just get out of their fucking way and let them destroy each other? And then
Mm-hmm.
leave us behind to kind of pick up the pieces and figure it out, and so a lot of times when I see them going after each other, I just leave them alone. I'm like, y'all go ahead and fight, like whatever, y'all do y'all's thing. I don't want any part of it. It's not my fight. I'm not even trying to play y'all's game. But on from a level of a white pill, I guess, a little bit of positivity coming in. I had a friend of mine always labeled himself a anarcho syndicalist. And I always told him when we would get into philosophical discussions, we would be talking strategy. I'm like, dude, you're just a libertarian. You're a mutualist. Like, there's nothing wrong with your point of view. I don't know why you're trying to nuzzle up next to tankies when they have nothing in common with you. And he would always bring up the for instance of Catalonia. And I'm like, yeah, but look what happened in Catalonia. As soon as there was an anarchist society, the tankies came through and killed all the fucking syndicalists and ran them out of power, and took over control of Catalonia. They used y'all as useful idiots. And you have to be aware that that's what these statists are doing. They're going to utilize you as a useful idiot. Well, a couple of weeks ago, he came out and he was like, dude, I've tried fighting against the idea, but you're right. I'm a libertarian. What do I do next? And I started feeding. I fed him Hazlitt Economics in One Lesson. I fed him some Rothbard Anatomy of the State, and I fed him some Konkin. And I was like, this is what you need to read, man, because this is the way forward. We can't be dividing these lines in such a minute way and get all caught up on these terms in such a way. So there is hope that there are people willing to accept and digest these ideas.
Well, so I think a good point to bring up in regards to this specific case is that the term syndicalist can be either anarcho or statist. If he was an anarcho syndicalist, um, he was already pretty much libertarian because of the anarcho part, and like there's a significant amount of anarcho syndicalists who are actually anarcho, which means libertarian by default. The first political libertarian was a communist. Yeah. So okay. So the first libertarian was anarcho-communist, and he was a man called Joseph de Jacques, and he went by the political label libertarian before it was widely used at all. It was based in the idea of like metaphysical, like philosophical libertarianism, and the idea that we have free will, life is not determinist, and we can choose our own fate. Um, which is why, by the way, racists can't be libertarian, because they believe we're guided by our genes exclusively, and that puts us into castes by default. Um, so the general idea is that, like, that was like 200 years ago. It not quite, but close. 200 years ago, that this guy came out with this label, and then slowly the label started to turn more rightist because of America. The label was pretty much exclusively leftist in the 19th century.
Right.
And then in the 20th century, it started to gain more rightist flavor because of American libertarianism. But American libertarianism was still originally informed by the leftist ideals like Albert J. Nock and Rose Wilder Lane before anybody heard of Mises or Rothbard or any of these other people. We're talking about libertarianism from the perspective of a liberationist philosophy, even if it was still decidedly further right than the previous people. And then later on, Murray Rothbard himself admitted that the term had been reappropriated by the right and sort of taken from the left.
Mm-hmm.
And but this was also like around the same time that he that a letter he participated in, which was also part of the later part of a journal called Left and Right. He acknowledged that like libertarians should work with the left. They should work with like any side that is willing to support liberty. And that's why I think libertarian unity is not only possible, but it's funny when right libertarians who are all Rothbardian, they all support all these things that Rothbard liked, and then they say, "Oh, yeah, let's never work with the left." Also, here's my Lysander Spooner profile picture. Let me ignore that he was a socialist in a workers' union, because like that's what anarcho-syndicalism is. It's all about unionizing and trying
Right.
to take down power from the inside. And it's funny to see people who are so anti-left supporting historically leftist people and then complaining when you say, yeah, we should support them now too. It's like nothing's changed. The state has gotten worse. That's the only thing that's changed. And that means we need more support and more people than ever. And that's going to involve not siloing, not ossifying, not getting to these isolated little circle jerk ass groups that don't do anything. Like, the Libertarian Party has never gotten more than 4% of the vote. That should tell you something. And it certainly wasn't fucking recent. So I don't know what these people are talking about when they say we're winning, we're succeeding. Like, maybe the Mises Caucus can pull in some numbers, but maybe they'll pull in enough numbers that they pull in enough undesirables that, like, hey, these people will make them look bad. And then suddenly libertarianism will have a whole new image problem to worry about. Nobody actually knows. Like, this is all just throwing darts and hoping something works. And that's why partyarchy, as Samuel Edward Konkin III put it, was a mistake and an attack on libertarian. All these political approaches, this whole spirit of libertarianism, which is basically fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. Like, the whole idea of libertarianism was always supposed to be to flout the establishment, to be better than the state, and to use practical, like, direct action approaches. And then suddenly in the 70s, the Libertarian Party comes out, and now everybody who's a libertarian is allegedly minarchist. Well, fuck no, we aren't. We're still there, and we're still doing what we always did, being anti-statist. And the idea that we suddenly have to support the partyarchy, that we suddenly have to support all these minimal government approaches, be fiscally conservative and socially liberal. Fuck that. I'm not either conservative or liberal. Those are political labels. I'm anarchist. Fuck all of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And, you know, I kind of make a joke and I jest on my podcast, you know, that anarchists are more conservative than conservatives are, because anarchists at the very least are willing to go back to the Articles of Confederacy, you know, and like we'll take that, we'll conserve that, long before we'll try to deal with any of this post FDR bullshit.
Well, then, of course, it would have helped if the original founding of the U.S. was actually pro-freedom. It was never pro-freedom. The
Right.
Constitution was always a scam. Like, any society that relies at least partially on slavery to get its economy going is not a society that supports freedom, and they will always find a permanent underclass to maintain their parasitic system. The difference between then and now is that the prisoners are in prison, or sorry, the slaves are in prison, and they're making the entire country into a prison so that the slaves can be everywhere, so that the plantation can be universalized, and that they can have a nice fat sedentary group of tax cattle that they can constantly pull meat off of.
Yeah, one of the things I've been saying for years is Lincoln didn't end slavery. He ended private slavery, and he institutionalized public slavery.
Oh, well, he didn't either though. Like he didn't end either. Like, public slavery is still a thing, and it's even worse now than ever, because not only do we have the prison system, but they're also massively, which is basically slave labor, even though they still quote pay them in order to avoid it being called that. But the people in sweatshops overseas that make a significant amount of goods for the U.S., those people are paid less than U.S. prisoners, and like a lot of the time, their factory conditions are worse than prisons. So if we get to call prison labor slave labor, which I think is accurate, then we should also call the other stuff slave labor. And sometimes it very definitely is when they're using it as a political punishment. So there's still that, and there's also a private prison system which comprises a significant amount of the US prison system, so there's still private slavery in that regard. And then beyond all of that, there's the fact that the entire economy is built on debt. Like, the not Federal Reserve chucks us all into the same basically slave camp, saying that we owe hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt by default because we were shot out of a cunt. Like, the whole idea of the Federal Reserve and the taxation system is creating a giant prison, creating a giant tax farm, and then there's tyranny. Who would have thunk it?
Yeah. Well, and that's a exceptional point. Whenever you get to overseas, I never looked at that the exact same the way you just worded it, but no, you're absolutely right that these private corporations are just they are just implementing slavery or on different government borders, and so. And then we look at how they came out with these and implemented these lockdowns and shut down, small businesses all around the country
to consolidate power into the hands of these corporations.
Right.
Which, by the way, just to say, they're not private. Corporations are by nature.
Oh, no. Yeah, absolutely. And so you had the state shut down all these mom and pop shops all over the country, all over the world, and consolidate all that power and wealth and influence into the corporation's hands. And you see people that having their businesses completely shut down, will never recover, will never be back in business, operating their family business ever again due to these lockdowns. And Amazon makes more money than it's ever made before in a year. And people just want to defend Amazon. And it's like, no, there's too much pain and suffering that has been created by these lockdowns for us to turn a blind eye.
So, and that's because there's additionally not only the mom and pop shops, you can't do private commerce on an individual level in a lockdown either. You can't have a lemonade stand because people are afraid of the coop. You can't sell hot dogs because people are afraid of the coop. You can't have a yard sale because people are afraid of the coop. You can't do any of this stuff because people are afraid of a probably manufactured virus. Look into the BSL-4 level lab if you haven't already. Um, and the entire notion of this lockdown was about power consolidation. And then, like, you end up with all these people demanding contact-free solutions, and then suddenly we have a facial recognition super state because the state's been trying to build this forever. And then that facial recognition thing is supposed to be linked to an ID, which is called, strangely enough, ID 2020, the year the virus started, also funded by vaccine initiatives. And then you get these massive, massive power fluctuations toward the state because suddenly you've got this identity that they're trying to create on a permanent blockchain and another blockchain they're trying to create create the new Fed coin, which is a privacy-free coin. And all of this is designed to isolate power in the hands of the state, but also their corporate creations. And that's the thing. Like, one of the key flaws in a significant amount of libertarian quote unquote thinking, and I stress that very, very sarcastically, is that a lot of libertarian thinking is flawed in that they claim capitalism is the free market. Bitch, we ain't had a free market in fucking ever. This isn't a free market. There's nothing free about this market. This market has always been controlled tightly, and the people that the powers that should not be want to benefit are the people who benefit. You can't get around that. So the ultimate fact is that the left was right all along because they called it the state and they were referring to both capital and the government. The people in charge and the people who enable the most profitable and powerful corporations, that's still the state, even if people on the right don't like to admit it because they want to think that business is going to save the world. If it was going to save the fucking world, it already would have. Like, things have progressed fast enough that they could do it if they wanted to. They don't fucking care about you. They're not listening to your podcast, libertarians. I'm talking to all of you. So we need to do it ourselves, and we need to fight the state ourselves by direct action. And that includes its corporations. That includes the businesses it empowers. That includes the financial markets that it manipulates and controls. Like, the fact that everything is centrally manageable from a Federal Reserve level, and the fact that it just merged with the Treasury, God, it was so fucking hilarious when that happened. Redheaded neo. It was so hilarious when the redheaded libertarian slash neocon came out with this thing when that happened and said, like, did Trump just end the Fed? No, dipshit. He didn't end the Fed. He consolidated their power with the group that they've always cronyistically worked with.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole financial system is a scam. It's always been a scam. That's the reason that the dollar itself can be a Ponzi scheme. Social Security can be a Ponzi scheme. Public health insurance can be a Ponzi scheme. So many of these things can just be scams, and it's considered fine and acceptable. In fact, there's entire schools of thought built around that scam now, like modern monetary theory, where, hey, we're all involved in this scam, so we might as well scam better. So like, it's fucking hilarious when, like, libertarians try to claim that, like, all these anti-libertarian institutions will suddenly have their six. They don't have your six. They don't care about you.
They don't give a
So the ultimate truth is, right. So the ultimate truth is that even if we got rid of the cathedral and suddenly progressives weren't in charge of the education system, that doesn't mean it's going to be any fucking better. The fascists that were in charge of the original education system that got imported here didn't do any better for their people. They just made them go to war more. So fantastic. You got one system of enslavement and violence, and you trade it through rather than abolishing the whole thing because you were so focused on the right and how the right should get in charge and the right would be better. Well, maybe or maybe not. Maybe you're full of shit. And that's one of the things. Like, I started to get involved in libertarianism in these rightist circles, and that's where a lot of my initial support came from. Now that I'm saying everyone's full of shit, and I had 4 years of Trump to go against, they suddenly don't like me so much. I wonder why. And so I've become more cynical and darker, but, like, I'm basically still who I was then. I'm just better at not giving a fuck that people don't like me.
Yeah. Well, and you look at how all this ties together and all this the whole cartelization of everything. And when they did pull these lockdowns out, they shut these supply chains down, right? And so then you started seeing these
Mm-hmm.
shortages, and people wanted to blame everything but the government. They were blaming the free market. They blamed libertarians. They blamed everything they could, but they wouldn't blame the government for all the lockdowns all over the world. And you had a situation where manufacturing plants, we had shipped so much of our manufacturing overseas to China that whenever they shut down every manufacturer in China for 3 months, it fucking destroyed the global economy, and nothing was being shipped into the United States. And then you had the supply chains here start breaking down, and you first saw that with toilet paper, and then it just kind of
Right.
trickled on through into every other. And what they were doing, and this is what I was telling John Odermatt the other day when I was on his show, what they were doing was they were ordering truck drivers to shift their attention. So at first it was like, oh well, y'all should be running medical supplies, and then suddenly you have a toilet paper shortage, so y'all should be running toilet paper, and then suddenly you have a meat shortage. Well, you should be running meat. Well, I mean, you can't y'all can't be reacting to these things after the fact in that way, shape, or form. That's not the way that the supply chain is set up. You need to keep what's moving smoothly, and find new ways of moving this new material the to the consignees, to the stores, and get it in the hands of the consumers. But that's not what they wanted to do. They wanted to keep shifting attention over, and they started it just destroyed everything. So for the last year and a half, we've been dealing with a supply chain that has been completely and totally devastated all around the world. And the guy I talked to, who's a supply chain expert, and he's been right on everything since all this started. He's saying 2 years, 2 years minimum, you're going to be dealing with a broken supply chain. And so gets us into the heart of the discussion that we really wanted to get into, is how do we need to learn, the American people especially need to learn how to hedge their bets, need to learn how to take care of themselves again. They need to learn to be self-sufficient again. Like, how do we get this out there that it's not Kroger's responsibility to supply you with shit, you know?
Right. Well, okay. So when everybody fucking, it doesn't matter who you are or what rock you've been living under. Like, I'm pretty sure people in Slab City know about the Ever Given situation.
Right.
So I wrote an article about the Ever Given situation from an agorist perspective, because I write for a joint called Agorist Nexus. And Agorist Nexus has a bunch of my articles on there, and they're all about how everything is related to the conspiracy of the state. And in this particular case, the article said Given and the Canal failed. The Ever Given and the Suez Canal. And I'm going to read a couple paragraphs from it, because I feel like they answer part of this question relatively thoroughly. The first paragraph goes, the first question you have to ask if you want to get to the bottom of this problem is, why does this ship halfway around the world affect America? The short answer is that globalists have made trade internationally interdependent for many decades, after centuries of making global trade routes through the use of naval fleets and more. Because of this, and because of the slow crawl of consumerism, global trade has slowly become more and more streamlined, emphasizing powerful multinational corporations and disempowering local vendors and producers. It's the standard "they took our jobs" trope. Empowered by regulations and the too big to fail mentality, these corporations have shifted labor to the cheapest possible locations in as many places, in as many ways as they could get away with. In order to get goods from those places to the places they're going, international sea trade routes had been established, among other routes such as land and air. The reason you can get 2-day shipping is because of this paradigm, and it means that in order to remain usable, a very complex system has to go off without a hitch on a daily basis. And the rest of the article was me describing how it didn't go off without a hitch. And then I went in a little bit later. Here are two more paragraphs from that. Globalization has been a slow grinding process by which centralized authorities have seized much of the globe in an attempt to control all activities around the globe, generally for the purposes of neoliberalism, profit, and colonial/imperial military conflict. It all goes to strengthen the huge statist hegemonies and empower the ruling elites to increase and strengthen their control. When a lot of people think about globalism, they think about the caricature of Alex Jones screaming about them, but he's not actually wrong. And when he goes over the fact that the Bilderberg Group is an evil organization and people should be very concerned about them, he's not wrong either. The chief reason for this is because globalism is the primary driving factor behind global tyranny. They fancy themselves the builders of the new world, and they think this gives them the right to control the world, meaning any inefficiencies are not a criticism of the state, but rather an excuse to grow it more. If you think that's bullshit, look into a concept called localism or localization. These concepts emphasize that doing things in your own community rather than relying on people far away to take care of things for you is best. It emphasizes using the kinds of farmers markets and bazaars Lily Forrester talks about in her articles, and the rugged individualism and cost cutting promoted by people like Storm DeLagara. Basically, using these two concepts, you can realize that the power to preserve global trade is deglobalizing it. Ultimately, the power is in the average person's hands, should they desire it enough to use it, and they can use that power to gradually stop giving it to the powers that should not be, so that they can continue this charade, which is clearly so fragile as to come to a grinding halt because of a literal boat accident. The answer is what it has been for a while, which is agorism, the use of black and gray markets to choke the state and its allies by stepping in wherever they fail and being more successful where they succeed, has a huge amount of swaying power over the common person.
Yeah, and yesterday I posted an article from last year, and it's talking about white market agorism because a lot of people are afraid of the gray and black markets. And so what this guy is arguing is that operating vertically in white market agorism, the way that Carl Hess had argued, or that Derek Bros would argue, to operate homesteading and farming and is white market, because you can do that legally and still be cutting the feed out from under these people. And so we have to there's got to be an effort on the agorist front to look at what each and every individual's situation is, and let them know, like, we're not asking you to be Jesse James. We're not asking you to be an outlaw. What we're saying is take whatever risk you find necessary and tolerable in order to survive. Because the ultimate goal is for each and every person to survive. If you can't take care of yourself, then you can't help anybody else. And, I know me, I want to help so many people, but ultimately my first priority is making sure that my home front is taken care of. And when my home front is taken care of, I know then that I can be depended on to help other people.
Right. Well, and I listened to you talk to that supply chain expert. I don't remember his name right now, but you can play that episode right now.
Yeah, it was his name was Ross. It's under the Huntsman.
Gotcha. Yeah, well, he brought up the bread basket and how bread baskets have a significant amount of problems. He also went over this in his thread that he has, which is a pretty good thread. I basically went through that episode and the thread to prepare for this, but like, the bread basket is a good thing to isolate a few key problems anarchists can address. So the first thing is, and I push this so much because I think it's very valuable. Food, not lawns. The idea is that part of the problems associated with the state and its industrialization and all of that shit is the fact that, like, HOAs and local governments have made it so that everybody has to have the same looking yard, and all these things have to be like manicured and conformist and all that shit. That centralization has prevented people from doing what they had done for fucking ever, which is using their yard for whatever they goddamn want. And in this particular case, um, people aren't growing food. People aren't growing necessities. People aren't running solar farms. People aren't running, like, don't have windmills. People could be doing so much, even in suburbia, even in urban environments, just by using their balcony and putting in a window box, or by using the roof as a community garden, which is something else I'll be going over. Like, uh, if people, I went on a really, in my vlogs, I talk for arguably too long about certain subjects because I don't have a script or anything, and it grows into an unhinged anti-government rant relatively quickly. But um, my most recent vlog is where I started. I get into calls with my family and I talk to them about politics sometimes during these calls because it just gets to that place. And ultimately, when my family had some, like my dad brought up this question because I told him all these uses of hemp, because basically both of them were concerned that this hemp product I got, they're both Christians, would be like a product that would get me high or something like that. And I'm like, it's just hemp. And I had to explain to him that, like mostly my father, that these hemp products are just basically protein and fat and shit like that. And it's like there's no THC in it basically. So there's no cannabinoids. It's not going to get me high. And then I went into like its long list of other uses, and I didn't even list them all. And I was like, so yeah, I mean, that's the real reason it's illegal, because the centralizers don't like the fact that something this useful exists and might be able to free people from the constraints of their commercial bullshit. And so my vlog the other day was me just going off on all the uses of hemp, of marijuana in terms of medical bullshit, of the plant in general. And I basically concluded that the reason people aren't doing this is because society has made it largely illegal for them to do this, and because society sucks in such a wide variety of other ways that even if they can do this, they would rather have weed so that they can escape from it. But hemp, just hemp, if people just grew hemp, could save them so much money every year. If they grew hemp, learned how to take the fibers out, learned how to extract the protein and the fats and shit, learned how to turn it into plastics, like they could make their own shit like 60% of the time or more. And that's just hemp. So picture a bunch of yards where instead of that perfectly manicured little like fucking fuddy-duddy green grass lawn thing that people like, it instead of saying hemp, and everybody just went to their hemp store because they already had hemp, their hemp storage facility, and or their chest or their fucking storeroom or something like that, and they just pulled their own hemp. Like, that alone would reduce their dependence on the market by like 60+%. And the whole idea of like market dependency depends on us thinking that we have to go to Walmart to buy a thing. If people made their own clothes, people made their own, plastics, et cetera, they would already rely less on a global supply chain. And that's
Right.
just hemp. So the rest of it, they could grow a single crop or more than one crop so that they could either just feed their own families or they could trade with neighbors. Like, there's a concept called the community kitchen, which is where there's one kitchen, and it's like you can lease it for a significant period of time and just make batches of whatever you wanted to make. People use these for either events, or if they're homeless, they can use it or something like that.
Mm.
And all they have to do is make sure that the place is clean by the time they get out. And like, it's like I've seen them for as low as like 15, 20 an hour. So like, that would eliminate the need for a mass kitchen, and you could just go in and make your food for a bit, and you would have your make ahead for a bit. um you know Community gardens, and of course the community kitchen could be used to feed the homeless. It could be used to provide cheap meals to firefighters and other members of the infrastructure that are actually necessary. um you know everybody except cops, because those people are not necessary and barely even people. So the general vibe is that we get to this point where uh like community kitchens could supplant a significant amount of people's buying anyway, and then they could just have events, you know, I'm going to make a buck ton of chili, and then you can come buy my chili for like $8. I'll give you a week's supply of chili, because I can afford all this, because I use these community resources. Community gardens are another good example, where you can just go to like the middle of town and there's a garden there, and you've planted your own fucking thing there, and you can just go back to that thing and harvest it, in a multi-crop environment, so plenty of nutrients. And then eventually, everybody has planted enough that they need less from the state, less from corporations, less from that sort of thing. So all of that combines to create a community, even on a capitalistic level, even on a marketist level, where you can immediately get benefits, and you can immediately start to sell. But even in a non-capitalist way, even from a unity perspective of working with the left, that already creates the model that could be, you know, shared means of production, because that's basically what it is. You would just need to not sell it for 15 an hour. It would need to be, you know, funded by some other means. But like, you could work with anyone in these models, because you suddenly have the tools that are available to the people, and they can, you know, get their full value of labor out of it. That's part of what Konkin was talking about, is the fact that people should get more of their full value of labor out of what they're doing, and that because they didn't, wage labor involved in extracting a lot of value out of people that shouldn't be, and paid them an abysmal amount of money, so that they weren't actually working for themselves, they were working for somebody, and they were stuck on that model because they didn't make enough to advance. So he thought that it would be good for class consciousness for people to start working much more for themselves and much less for other people. And that's one of the reasons that agorism itself was called a class consciousness thing, and why it's considered a left libertarian ideology, because it's all about class revolution, class warfare, and the fact that you're moving up from that class of essentially workers, to create a better working environment for every individual that also serves their needs the best, or at least as well as they can. And then you get into co-ops, which are just another example of communitarianism, which is where you have like you live on the site, you've got all the resources you need, you pull some food, and then occasionally, in order to pay bills in this state capitalist hellscape, you sell some food at the local farmers market, and things like that. And the farmers market is another good example of it, because you can just go there for your produce. You don't need Walmart. You want Walmart because you want cheap shit and electronics and clothing that you'll have to replace in a short bit, which is another thing. If you like made your own clothing, you would appreciate them more and you wouldn't treat them like shit. And you know, if you had more locally hand sourced clothing where people were making it by hand and it cost a little bit more, you might think twice about being reckless with food around it and staining it, or like treating it poorly so it got ripped while you worked, things like that. Like, people might give more of a shit if they had to throw more of their labor at it. Um, and that's just like the base level of it. Like, the whole idea should be like to eliminate your consumerist tendencies, to stop relying on the state capitalist machine, and to start relying more on people in your local community. And that's the ultimate way to like initially address the supply chain problems. And like having animals in your yard, right? And like, if your family had to rely on like more local sources and had to be more connected to their food, they might overeat less, because it's not just some magic thing that came out of a piece of plastic that they can shove in their fuckhole. So like, the whole idea of it should be like being as efficient as you can be, right? And like most people aren't interested in that because they've been raised to believe that this is the American way, as though that makes it okay. Um, you could probably tell that I spent a decent chunk of this morning listening to leftist protest music, but at the same time, like I have like a significant amount of issue with the way that people, they want the system to change, but they don't want to change their involvement in the system. It's like that Nothing More song. Everybody wants to save the world, but nobody wants to change themselves.
Right.
So much of the focus of my podcast is to point out abuses of power and how bad things have gotten and the direction in which we're heading as a society. And it can be a real black pill. I've partnered up with Richard Grove to offer my listeners an opportunity to sign up to his Autonomy Course. The Autonomy Course is designed for people looking for solutions, people that want to shape their own future, people that are not willing to be at the behest of large corporations or the United States government or the banking system. The Autonomy Course is designed for those of you who wish to have complete control of the reins of your life, who are looking to be successful, that to thrive and not just survive, to provide for your family by utilizing your existing skills and learning how to market and sell those skills in order to be your own boss, or learn new skills in order to leverage that into a new career opportunity. So if there's a job out there you've been trying to get or you've been wishing you could get, but you just don't have the skills for it, the Autonomy Course is the place for you to start, to learn how to land that position, to learn how to market yourself better, to gain confidence, and to be surrounded by a community of like-minded people that will encourage you and help you along the way. So use my affiliate links and go check out the Autonomy Course. It could be right for you.
Yeah, and that's the only thing that's going to change, and that's what Alongside Night, the fiction novel, is about. It's about the people that had made the changes in their own lives to operate in the underground counter economic, revolution, actually succeeding in winning the battle against the state as the state collapses. And we see this with the wealthy at the moment, where they're getting out of fiat currency and they're getting into non-inflationary assets like land. I mean, you had Bill Gates buy up 242,000 acres of farmland. He didn't do that because he wants to farm. You right? He did that because it's a non-inflationary asset that he can hold on to that will always retain value, if not grow in value, the entire time. And so many of the working class have been so conditioned to trade their time for money. I'm guilty of it. I'm always thinking, how much am I going to get per hour? How much am I going to get for this? Am I going to be able to, pay my mortgage? Am I going to be able to pay my child support? Am I going to be able to do this, that, and the other with it? And I have to learn. I've had to scale myself back and say, okay, so from an aspect of, let's take care of the necessities and get those paid for. Now with this excess, as much or as little as it is, how can I put that excess into a non-inflationary asset that will hedge my bet in the future, not only by growing my own food, by having a stocked pond, by having chickens. I plan on getting some goats here before long. And, so I also want to be able to have a currency that I can trade with other people that may have other skills that I require. And like you said, people that grow hemp, there's all kinds of things you can do with that. You make furniture out of it. You can make rope out of it. You can make toilet paper out of it. You can do almost anything you want with hemp. As you said, it's about 60% of your daily, consumption you could replace just by growing hemp on your own.
Well, that's part of the thing is that like uh first off though, like they've been doing the asset thing for like ever. That's one of the reasons that like it's always been a, like, oh, you succeeded, now you got a big house and cars and a bunch of fucking jewelry and clothes and shit. It's
Mm.
always been about that. People
Right.
don't buy boats because they like the ocean. So like the ultimate thing is that like when the elites want to put money somewhere, they can't just put it somewhere. It's all essentially money laundering. And it wouldn't surprise me because the only reason we know about the Bill Gates stuff right now is because of like a reporter uncovering a shell corporation that was doing his real estate dealings for him. That
Hmm.
like it wouldn't surprise me if like he had some shady dealings with some pharmaceutical companies or something, and he needed to hide that money real quick. So he put that money into land as soon as possible so that it would be shuffled around. Like, because the elites have been doing that for like it's the same reason they golf. It's not because they like golf. It's not because they think they look good in a polo shirt and slacks. Nobody looks good in a polo shirt. I fucking guarantee you do not look good in a polo shirt. If you are out there and you think you look good in a polo shirt, you look fucking stupid. Polo shirts are not good. Um, so like if you get to the point where you realize that, well, what are golf courses for then? They're really wide open places with like no proximity to recording devices where you can have secret meetings. It's the same bullshit mentality. It's like we're gonna isolate our power in all these places and then have places where we can talk about isolating power. Like Bilderberg is just one big shindig. The World Economic Forum is just one big shindig. They have plenty of little shindigs all the fucking time. That's the reason presidents golf so much. It's not because they actually give a shit about their score or getting like closer to par or like, getting holes in one. They care about getting holes in one in terms of like getting economic deals slaked out, planning who to bomb next, hiding corruption, um, doing shady deals for their finances. And that's the same reason they also buy assets so that they can dodge all the fucking loopholes and all this stuff. The reason they might be doing it more is because of a coming collapse, but like they've always been doing it. And like the common person, they don't have any scope of all of this. And they think of how do things affect me? Like for instance, your supply chain expert, he talked about how he had to cycle his fleet because of new regulations and shit.
Hmm.
And I made it a point to write down you wouldn't have to cycle your fleet in anarchy. You could just use the trucks you wanted and not have to send things to the junkyard. Like
Right.
there's a significant, but like there's also something that I didn't write down, which I sort of like mulled over this morning. There wouldn't need to be as much fleet or freight or whatever, which would isolate more quality because suddenly there would be less like a greater level of scarcity in terms of work, a greater level of scarcity in terms of contracts. So if you
Hmm.
wanted to be a trucker in this environment, you'd have to work really hard and provide extremely high quality for lower costs, because people would have
Actually,
less
I think
reason
it'd
to
be
use your
higher
services.
cost. Actually, I think it'd be higher cost.
Why?
Because truckers are actually the finance and just I only know this because I am a truck driver, but the income disparity that truck drivers are experiencing due to the government pumping money into these large, trucking corporations that have a fleet of like 2,500, 3,000 trucks is they're like driving down the wages of truck drivers. They always have. I started driving truck 18 years ago, making 42,000 a year, and I've never cleared over 56,000 a year in 18 years. And it's because they keep driving down the wages by subsidizing these trucking companies to put new drivers through school, and therefore they're driving the experienced drivers out. So all the drivers that have any skill, any experience, that know how to operate, and then they're dumbing down what it takes to drive a truck. Everything's automatic nowadays. They have all these sensors all over. You don't even have to pay attention half the time to what you're doing because your sensor will alert you that you're within 100 feet of a car, yada, yada, yada. So it takes no skill, no expertise to run a truck anymore. And this is part of the reason I'm coming back local. It's because I'm like, I hate what I'm doing. I want to spend time at home and working on my yard and being around my wife. And they're not paying me enough to be gone for 7 days a week.
Well, here's the thing. And here's where I think we might see some common ground on my lower cost approach here, because you're also still mandated by regulatory compliance. What I'm talking about is like anarchy. If we lived in anarchy, you wouldn't have regulatory compliance. You wouldn't have fuel taxes. You could make your own fuel out of things you gasified. Like if there was bulk waste from your freight shipments, like if people had broken pallets, you could gasify that and turn that into fuel for your truck. Like there's a lot of stuff. You wouldn't have to get tagged. You wouldn't have to pay like fees at those weigh stations. There would be a lot less in terms of
I see where you're coming from.
Especially since if you were on local terms, you wouldn't even have to go to those weigh stations. You could just do your local route and then come out on the other side. And that's what I want.
Right.
I don't want you to be shipping things from Vietnam and Taiwan and China and South Korea. I want you to be shipping things from Wyoming, like at most.
Yeah.
Like, so when it comes to these things, a lot of these things would be solved simply by that localization and by people having more money and more resources on their own. Because let's say people weren't throwing their food scraps out. Let's say they were blending them down into a slurry so that they could throw the paste in the garden, or chop and dropping and just chucking chunks in the garden so that they could dissolve into the soil. That would save some impact on the local waste management systems. It would improve their soil quality so that they could grow more and better hemp or whatever they were growing, and just a variety of other things. Let's say they didn't need to rely on those canned goods so much because they suddenly had a food stock that was local, and that they were growing in their own yard. Like ultimately, there would be less freight to ship if this was the like mainstream accepted model. And so you could do locally, and you could still make probably you could make net more and charge net less.
Yeah. No, you're right. I can see where you're coming from with that. Well, you would also not have an inflationary monetary system.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't need as much to survive. If you're dealing with something like a gold or a silver, and that's, a solid monetary system that's not going to be inflationary or deflationary by that any stretch of the imagination, then you would actually be working with less, and you would be able to operate with less. You look back into like the 40s, the 30s, and compared to now, I mean, the money has lost about 96% of its value. So $1 back then would go a long fucking ways compared to where it goes now. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I can see where you're coming from with that.
Well, yeah, and also if you want to talk inflation, they haven't even really fully adjusted for all the fuck they just fucked the economy with. Like they printed the graph is spiked. They printed so much, and Biden wants to print, I think it was like 6 trillion more.
I heard that
for his 4-year plan or whatever. And that's fucking insane, because that would that would effectively quadruple the debt. It would go from 2 to 8. And so I can't fathom how people think this is a stable system, but they don't need to think it's a stable system. They just need to think that they'll make it, because basically they've gone on this subsistence thing. They've gone on this mentality of like, oh, as long as I can make it to next month or next week or next day, I'll be fine. Well, shit ain't fine. Shit is collapsing, and shit is going to detonate. And ultimately, when it comes down to, they've been planning this like on Agorist Nexus here, where I go over the fact that economic collapse is a long time coming and inevitable. And so I'm going to read the first paragraph here. An old slogan goes, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And the US has been playing an extremely stupid game for a long time now. As many of you have heard, the stock market has been having some trouble lately. It seems that market manipulators, which trickle down from a state level, combined with an inefficiency of the state apparatus for handling disease, has created a rather precarious situation. The fact that coronavirus took hold, and this was written in March 14th, 2020, the fact that coronavirus took hold and that the state's answer was not only to freak out the entire planet with a long series of fear campaigns, but to institute a series of quarantines, closures, and other centralized measures to contain the problem, which have the common person rushing for supplies and safety, says a lot about how the current state handles hard situations. The fact that an alleged crisis in the oil market can cause more disruption is further evidence of mismanagement. With an economy rigged by unnecessary production and distribution of debt, and the fact that currency is corrupt and fake from the ground up, it's not if the US economy collapses, but when. The question is, have the chickens come home to roost, or will this be kicked further down the road? So I went over the fact that basically this is an empire, it's hegemony, it's blood money for oil and other natural resources, and the fact that the war has been for oil because the US runs on the petrodollar. And I went over all of this to go over the fact that the reason a lot of stuff is like this is because the US and the world in general have created a house of cards economy where if any little thing shakes it, the whole thing is massively torn apart. Like this most recent thing hasn't been the only thing. This is just like some nails in the coffin, and they have no problem with those nails in those coffins because they want it to die so that they can build a new empire on its corpse. Like the whole idea, there were murals in the Denver International Airport that symbolized mass death and war and shit, and then a new beginning of peace and harmony. There's a fucking pale horse on the runway, and the Georgia Guidestones talk about reducing the human population to 500 million in perpetual harmony with nature. And so you end up with all of these like demonic fucking terrible sycophants like drooling for the boot, and then the boot suddenly descends on them too, and they're like, oh shit, what the fuck? And they have to suddenly panic about supply chains and like loss of revenue and like loss of global freight, and oh, the Ever Given had a junk off to the side, so now we shut down everything. The Ever Given, I think, is still there, by the way, because the Egyptian government is holding it over for fees that they claim that they were responsible for them losing, like $9 billion in fees. So the ship is still fucking there. And oh, by the way, to lighten the mood a little bit, if you're a furry out there, the centralized government is the reason you might not have gotten your bad dragon dildo, because those things were on the ship when it got fetched up on the side there, and it's probably still over. So if you're missing your bad dragon dildo, blame the state. Be anarchist, or you're not a real furry. The general idea should be to recognize the core problem, which is the state, and it always fucking has been. Like, and I find myself with common ground with both the left and the right. There's an article written by Brian Ashton. I found it on the Anarchist Library, and he basically goes over that the global factory without walls and is a global revolution against the capital class. So like there's further they've spread themselves out, the more vulnerable they've made themselves. And I think they recognize this, which is why they want a global system of identification, free dollars, so that they can still have their empire but not have a way to escape from it. Like that's what they're trying to do, you know. And there's like a ton more in this regard, where like I saw this paper which is very interesting. I recommend people read it. And it's called the price of anarchy for centralizing or decentralizing freight transport organization through serious gaming. And basically it used game theory to discuss like either hyper control, centralization versus decentralization in terms of freight. And what their conclusions were that, quote, this research investigates the performance of difference in centralization and decentralization in freight transport allocation. A serious game is developed to simulate the two organizations in order to gather data that reflects the real market in practice. At this stage, the preliminary results show, as expected and as known in the fundamental theory, that the centralized model always outperforms in terms of global efficiency and effectiveness, and it yields the optimal social welfare, while decentralization has better individual incentive for carriers in terms of individual gain and flexibility. So basically, they're claiming that it's better for people globally. But what does that mean? It means that there are certain pockets of the world which are not doing well, but they're discarded as lower data in the set.
Right.
Statistically, maybe shit is improving for all the rest of us who aren't child slaves mining your computer chips, or who aren't like, you know, poorly paid or not paid at all lithium miners in a war-torn country strip mining a fucking pit for your fucking batteries for your goddamn Teslas. Fuck Elon Musk. I went on a long rant about him as well recently. But like, the ultimate truth here is that like the centralization may benefit things on a global scale in general by
Right.
averages, but to the individuals the impact is very real. And then the last part of that, where it says the decentralized better individual incentive for carriers in terms of individual gain and flexibility, that's exactly it. Which means that if you really want to improve global social welfare entirely, you need to entirely decentralize. And that would mean that everybody had equal access to that benefit for individual gain and flexibility, and everybody could do better.
Right.
Like, so I researched this. Apparently, the price of anarchy metric is actually really common in freight, which is an interesting thing that I didn't know until the past several weeks. But like, so researching for this show is going to give me fodder for an article I'm going to write on this subject as well. But like, it's not just this. It's like, you could open a food bank. There's something called Anarchy Closet where people just donate shit, and then people can just go grab that shit. There's like small libraries where you don't have to like go buy a book, because these little libraries pop up on the corners of streets, or because there's a library that just pops up in a town or whatever. These things have been shut down by the state frequently. The state has shut down homeless food drives frequently. The state has shut down anarchy closets multiple times. They've shut down anything that competes with their highly centralized model, because they still want you to believe that you need this.
Yep.
You know, it's fucking insane. And the fact that people don't understand that it's fucking insane is because they were indoctrinated. The system started them out from a very young age to, you know how they say kids can't consent to sex?
Yeah.
That's true, Ian Freeman. But at the same time, like, the whole idea here should be that they can't consent to things like, you know, nationalism, going to war, being indoctrinated into the cult of statism. So before the fucking salute was changed, it was still the same salute for Nazis in the Pledge of Allegiance, the Bellamy salute. And it was all about Bellamy, a French socialist who wrote this fucking screed that said, oh yeah, we're going to nationalize the US and give them a sense of community. Well, good fucking luck with that, because they're also siloed and ossified, and everybody's got their own little clique on social media. And, you know, this all like drives the whole like rally around the flag effect, only in this case, it's rally around the 2 minutes hate, and everybody gets to act like, because they hated the right person for like that 1 second for that day, that they're not still part of a corrupt system. So they're raised from this like very early age to think that they do need all of this, because their side has to win. They're left or right, or they're left or right, or they're fucking jack off click. Like, the whole idea is well, okay, so like I'll start off like after left or right, and I'll wrap it up. You know, there's like this problem where people have like grown to accept the paradigm And that growing to accept the paradigm is the reason we're not already decentralized, because everybody knows how bad it is. They know how bad things are. They don't need to be told that. What they need to be told is that they have been lied to. And that lie has caused every single problem that they could potentially mention. Because most problems people have, they could isolate to the state if they really wanted to. If they were willing to say that it's not the left or the right, it's the state that's the real problem. You know, but like the whole notion here is that personal and individual responsibility is the supply chain if done properly. The supply chain can be decentralized and it could benefit us all, but the centralists don't like that very much. So like we have to get to a point where we're willing to unite for the common cause of what we really want. We have to fight the real enemy, you know? Yeah. And ultimately it's going to come down to whether or not people truly want to live post-apocalypse, because at the current rate, it's spiraling, it's skyrocketing. The apocalypse is very likely going to happen because people weren't smart enough to just walk away when they could have. Like, and they weren't smart enough to realize the true enemy, to realize the centralization at the root of a lot of their problems. Like, and it even extends to libertarian camps. I wrote the other day on Twitter, I said, some libertarians say they want a government small enough they could drown it in a bathtub. Instead, they got an in-group small enough they could lose it down the drain. So we need to have a better future and a better appreciation for the present, or we're fucked. Yeah. And we need to do that from a libertarian perspective, recognizing free will and individuality, or we're fucked. And that means we're fucked because the common person isn't going to do that. So ultimately, we just need to improve our own lot in the world so that we can at least live as well in the hellscape as possible. Yeah. Because, if it takes this much talking to get the common person to grow something in their front yard, don't think they're going to accept much more than that.
Yeah, well, work on yourself, work on your community. And, I always say if it came to voting locally and there was something worth voting for, I'd vote locally, but I would never vote nationally ever again. And, but plug whatever you got to plug, man. This was fun. I really enjoyed it.
You can find me on Twitter currently. I might be censored again. I had like 17,000 followers last time before I was, but you can find me at Jeremiah EXE on Twitter. You can also find a bunch of links on that for now anyway. If you listen to this after I'm banned, you can find me at cointr.ee/insanity is free, or jeremiahharding.com. There's a lot of places you can find me, or you can just read my articles at agoristnexus.com. There's plenty of places, but mostly don't find me. Find yourself. You're more important to your life than anybody else is.
All right, man. Well, I had a blast. I really enjoyed this. You're always full of information, and I love listening to you. So,
well, good to hear.
I'm going to stop the recording.
Said you're just a slave. All your good intentions took you to your grave. Your pride is how they killed you. With the flag you wave just like a fool. They promised you a mountain, gifted you a stone. They demanded that you throw it into your neighbor's home, and then seize all that they worked for and give it to the throne just like a tool. Well, as we all just stand in line and glorify new ways of being cruel, it seems to me humanity is not something that they're teaching us in school. They dumb us down all around, propaganda, their pollution. They set a cage up on the stage, a facade for all solution. They build a wall, block them all from this mental institution. It's insane. Now they're writing their own rule books and they're crossing all their T's. They're fashioning their people to all wear beggars' knees. If you want a clean drink of water, well, you must say pretty please. It's all a game. As we all just stand in line and justify these crimes done in our names. It seems to me authority and tyranny are both one and the same. Well, it's time to change the channel. It's time to set things right. Make them all rot with fear in their beds at night. Devour all their worthless souls and sacrificial right, just like we should. Of those who are to blame, and we'll stack them up like cordwood, watch them sizzle on the flames for good. Well, as we all just stand in line waiting for some kind of Robin Hood, our liberty will never be until our right to freedom is understood.